Hello everyone, I'm an urban fantasy author, Carrow Brown. I also write romance under the name of Faye Black, and I'm here today to talk to you about Mary Sue's. So I've talked about Mary Sue's in the past, actually in like my first year on YouTube, and I wanted to revisit the topic because not only has my understanding of Mary Sue's kind of evolved and developed a little bit more, but I've had this conversation about what a Mary Sue is, why we usually don't like it in published writing, and a number of other things. And since I keep seeming to have these recurring conversations, I thought I would just make a video about it. Have to supply a demand, and apparently my demand is talking about Mary Sue's, so let's do it. What is a Mary Sue? Typically, Mary Sue's are referred to in a very negative way because they're kind of author inserts. If you are not aware of the history of a Mary Sue, it actually started with Star Trek fanfiction. There was a character, her name was Mary Sue, and the author wrote this fanfiction story that got published in a magazine, and if I remember the summary of the story, it was a 16-year-old girl, first captain in the Federation. She was on the Enterprise, and both Spock and Kirk were kind of like fantasizing about her, and at one point she goes into engineering and points out like a big flaw that Scotty seemed to have like looked over, and a number of other things, kind of leaning toward being slightly superior than all the other characters while also being wanted by all of them. I'll be the first to tell you that in typical fanfiction, Mary Sue's are pretty harmless. It's people like wanting to be part of adventures and going out and just kind of having fun with it. In fact, in a fanfiction sense, I'm never really going to say too much badness about a Mary Sue just because it's the author looking to have fun with one of their favorite genres and their stories and IPs, and at the end of the day, if you're writing it and you're enjoying it, go for it. But with typical fiction, it's not a good thing. Mary Sue's, or Gary Sue's in this case, in fiction, is usually when somebody will write themselves into a story, and it's, you know, the whole author insert thing. And within that author insert, they basically take away like their own flaws or their own shortcomings, kind of spruce up their character, and have them be like, I don't even know how to word this. Mary Sue's are usually characters that can do no wrong in a story. People who don't like them are always the bad guy, or they're like immature and disliking them. Mary Sue's or Gary Sue's don't really have any faults, and if a Mary or a Gary Sue makes a mistake in the story, it ends up being like for the better good of the story. There's no character development, there's no flaws, there's like they're like a being of complete perfection, can do no wrong, everybody loves and admires them. Sometimes they're kind of like, oh, I'm so ugly, while everybody's kind of like, oh my god, you're so beautiful. And to be really honest, they're boring. Completely boring. In fact, the big takeaway that I've always had with the Mary Sue character is that they've got no character development, they've got no conflict, and their motivation is it's shallow, there's nothing there. So that's my big reason why I don't like Mary Sue's, because the whole reason that we read stories is we're reading about a character that is kind of involving in a conflict, they're experiencing some kind of hardship, and we want to root for them, right? We want to see them struggle and overcome something, and we also want to see them learn a really big lesson, whether that be like, you know, self-made families, or overcoming insecurity, or just name a thing that you would like your character to do. We want to see that growth, but Mary Sue's don't really have that because they're, oh man, I wish I could cite you guys some books, but it would be really immature of me to do that. But all the stories that involve a Mary Sue have a character that doesn't actually change from the start to the end. There's no growth, there's no nothing, they're just kind of like, oh gee golly. And the whole flaws thing, that's a really big thing that I want to mention too. As much as people like to gripe about like heroines in romance novels that kind of like suddenly like go off into danger and it seems like a thoughtless thing to do, being impulsive is a flaw, and it can land a character into more trouble, but that also creates conflict, that creates tension, and it gives us some kind of like, you know, rah-rah investment with the character. It's like, no, stupid, why are you doing that? But a Mary Sue doesn't do that. Like, because the author is well aware of what's going on in the story, they have like a god hand on the Mary Sue, so that way anything that the Mary Sue does, it's not going to actually be like bad, it's going to be guided towards like, you know, making sure that that character is always going to be doing right in the eyes of the others. And if it's so bad, and I always hate it in stories as well where Mary Sue's, I mentioned earlier about how they're liked by everybody, but then like the villain becomes like super obsessed with them. It's like, if I can't have them, then I'll burn the world. And it's like, that's even worse. I don't like that. No. I talked a little bit about what a Mary Gary Sue is. I talked about how they came into the birth of the world, and there's a little bit more into the history of a Mary and Gary Sue, but I don't really want to dive into it because that evolution process is pretty interesting. But I want to focus on trying to help you as a writer overcome your Mary Gary Sue syndrome that you may have. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with the basic way to avoid having a Mary or Gary Sue, and that's called developing a character. Basic character, and I say basic because that's really what it is, basic character development is going to help you avoid having a Mary and Gary Sue. You have to talk about flaws, you have to talk about motivation, you have to talk about the conflict in their life right now that they're trying to overcome, and you have to like kind of get into like the nitty-gritty of why they're doing what they're doing. A lot of people, when they make a character, don't really ask the why question, like why does my character act the way that they do? And if you can answer that question on top of everything else, then you're going to have a pretty fleshed out character. But I want to circle back to the whole flaws and motivation, because with Mary and Gary Sue's, like the flaw that I frequently see is they're too nice, or their flaw isn't really a flaw. It's kind of like excessive cleaning or something like that. When I mean a flaw, I mean like a flaw, like not a virtue disguised as a flaw. The only time that you can get away with disguising a virtue as a flaw is in a job interview. That's really it. You know, when they say like, what's your shortcoming at work? You say, oh, well, I have a tendency to maybe over-organize a little bit. And they're going to be, oh, yeah, we like that. When a fictional character, nah, we're not interested. We don't want that. We want like something that's wrong. Like, are they impulsive? Are they single-minded? Like, what is the thing that makes them actually like people? For example, in my book of Queens and Swords of Silence, not to plug my own work, but it's the one thing that I can reference without being immature. My main character, Ghost, has a lot of different shortcomings. For one thing, she doesn't cope with stress very well. She kind of goes towards substances, aka alcohol, in order to numb herself to the things that she's feeling. She's got low self-esteem, and she's also got a lot of negative self-talk. And those are all things that a lot of people can relate to. You know, when we don't feel good, we want to numb ourselves to it in some shape or form. Maybe we do that with exercise, or maybe we do that with alcohol or something else. So that is a thing that makes her kind of relevant to other people, even though she's not fully human. And then the negative self-talk, we all can relate to negative self-talk, realistic negative self-talk, not that whole like, oh my god, I'm so ugly, but you look in the mirror and you've got like luscious brown hair and like everything else, like, you know, being realistic. Granted, this is where somebody in the comments will be kind of like perception, and some people think they're ugly when everybody, I understand. I guess what I'm trying to say is that when people kind of use like the reference of saying that I'm so ugly, it's the author feeling guilty about writing an attractive character. And so they try to alleviate that guilt a little bit by describing a character, thinking that they're not, while also describing that they are. And maybe we'll overcome that, maybe we won't. It's really a writing style kind of thing. But that's kind of why I don't really like it when characters are kind of like, oh, I'm so ugly, and then, you know, everybody talks about how beautiful they are. It's like, it's okay. You can have a character that admits that they're pretty. It's fine. For example, there's a book I have, it's called Dom Next Door. It's a Faye Black story for my Bound and Gag series, and the main character in that story is actually vain. She is. She's vain because she knows that she's pretty, and she focuses on cosmetics and heels and her appearance and everything else like that. And even though she's vain and that could be considered a flaw, that's also something that a lot of people do. They do kind of focus on how they appear towards the outside world. And you could also say that that kind of attention to the outward appearance is also social armor. I don't know if you guys have explored that concept too much. I would love to talk about it if you're interested. But again, we're going to refocus on to how to avoid a Mary Sue at this point. Now, I would like to circle back to the why part of why your character acts the way they do. And a lot of ways that you can answer that question is going to be with their background. You can give them a very detailed background, or you can give them a one-page background. I tend to stick with a one-page because if I have to make multiple pages for a character, I'm getting lost in the weeds and I've got other things I could be working on right now. But take a look at your character's backstory and see how events from their childhood and teenage years affect the choices that we make right now. I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this right now can reflect on what it was like to be in high school and how experiences in high school have kind of colored their perception of how they engage with other people right now. Same thing applies to your character. Key moments as children and as teenagers do change how we behave around other people. So take a moment to like grab a sticky note or whatever closest piece of paper that you have to you and write down some key things that did change the way that your character saw the world at those two pivotal moments. And also feel free to talk about what your character is good at and is not good at. Are they a good cook? Are they a terrible cook? Do they like to keep things neat and organized? Or are they the kind of person that likes to just throw clothes and like figure it out later, right? There's a lot of different things that you can say about those mindsets of people, and again, that adds color to your character and also kind of takes away from the whole Mary Sue aspect, because if, again, you take a look at what they're good at and what they're not look at, and you can kind of show them in equal measure, that will make a character that people usually like to, read about. And part of the reason that I guess I really want to harp on the Mary Sue concept and trying to avoid it is because stories that are very interesting for people are going to be character first and plot second. There's an argument that goes back and forth about which ones are better, plot or characters first, but all the books that I have heard that have done very well are always character first. People care about the characters because they become invested in those characters. And that is definitely something that you want. You want to make an experience where your reader is going to see this character, they're going to love it, and they're going to want to cheer for them or yell at them or root for them or make it a family member, right? And that I could probably dive into the psychology of why we become as attached to characters as we do, but I will say that that is definitely something that you would like to lay the ground for and help foster with your readers. Now, I've done a lot of talking, and obviously everything that I have to say is not the be-all and end-all of this topic. I would like to pose 2 questions to you guys because I am always interested in what you have to say, and perceptions of other people usually will enlighten me and educate me further. What to you is a Mary Sue? What are some typical trademark things that they do that stand out to you that you would like to share? And then the second question are, what are tips and tricks that you could provide to a new writer right now to help them avoid a Mary Sue? I obviously provided mine, but you will likely have something that you think will be more detrimental than what I provided. Just leave that. I got a pinned comment down there. Feel free to go in there and just leave that answer in there, or you can just make your new comment however you want. But again, I'm very interested to know what your answer to that question is going to be. And that is going to wrap us up for this video. I thank you guys again so much for taking the time to listen to what I have to say on this topic. I really do appreciate the investment that you're giving me. And I'm going to go ahead and sign off. If you are interested in knowing anything about if I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this writing nonsense, I've got some links down below, one to my books and another one to my newsletter where I actually provide weekly tips and tricks for improving yourself as a writer, and you can take a look at that. That's going to wrap up the video. Thank you guys again for coming and hearing what I have to say, and I will talk to y'all again real soon. Bye!